I'm live here in Washington speaking from the Conservative Political Action Conference organised by the American Conservative Union. It is a huge event. I mean, there is no party political conference in the United Kingdom that comes anywhere near the sheer scale of this. And for the second year in a row, we had the Vice President Pence speaking this morning, and tomorrow morning President Trump will be here speaking to at least 10,000 people packing into this hall. And whilst originally this conference was really going to be talking about the big midterm elections that are coming up here in November, absolutely unavoidably, the whole debate in the USA right now is about gun crime and what should be done in terms of gun control. So let's just remind ourselves, Nicholas Cruz opened fire at the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School on Valentine's Day, killing 17 people. And survivors of that massacre turned up yesterday to meet the president and to urge him to bring in stricter gun controls. This boy, for example, hid in a cupboard during the shooting, and he and his dad were there yesterday talking to the president. Here's what they had to say.
There needs to be a significant change in this country because this has to never happen again. And people should be able to feel that when they go to school, they can be safe.
People are dying, and we have to stop this. We have to stop. If he's not old enough to buy a drink, to go and buy a beer, he should not be able to buy a gun at 18 years old. Please, Mr. Trump, these are things we have to do. We got to do something about this.
So, yesterday, Donald Trump had what he called a listening session. He listened to these families, he listened to people who had lost their children, not just in Florida, but in previous school shootings as well. And he came out with a suggestion yesterday that maybe some teachers should themselves have concealed guns, so that if bad things happen in schools, they can respond to it quickly. In response to this atrocity on Valentine's Day, you know, the services got there, the emergency services got there, but it took them 10 minutes to get there. Now, nobody would criticize 10 minutes as a response time. It's actually pretty good, but hey, an awful lot of damage can be done if someone's there with a gun in the space of 10 minutes. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about the interpretation of what Trump was actually saying in terms of what teachers should be armed. But interestingly, today, this morning, here at CPAC, the all-powerful National Rifle Association's Wayne LaPierre made some comments on what the president had to say about arming teachers in schools.
It's a bizarre fact that in this country, our banks, our airports, our movie stars, our politicians, they're all more protected than our children at school.
Now, I've been going around today talking to delegates here, asking them what their response was to the National Rifle Association's speak and what they thought should be done about guns in schools.
I think that arming teachers is a fantastic idea, and I think that it's something the NRA should support. The NRA has always been probably the foremost voice on guns, and I think that since they get the most attention, it's important for them to really be out there and supporting good calls like that. Although certain other calls like the bump stock ban, like raising the age of rifles, I don't know if I support it when they get behind them on things like that.
My mother's a teacher, so I've kind of discussed this with her anecdotally a little bit. And she herself wouldn't necessarily be comfortable carrying a firearm into the school on her own person. However, other teachers being armed in school, she feels, as well as myself, that would make the environment a lot safer as long as the students don't know who is concealed carrying during school. But all in all, I think that it would definitely prevent more mass shootings and it would make schools safer.
Metal detectors and armed security guards are very important. I had them in my high school, so I felt that added a lot of safety because we had to go through bag checks every day, and I know that's not the norm, but I think it's a very useful thing, and it definitely helps with a lot of stuff coming into schools.
So what did the president say yesterday when he talked about teachers carrying guns on a concealed basis so they could respond if these atrocities occur and break out? Well, it was interpreted by the press that he'd said to arm every teacher. He, of course, responded today very strongly by saying, "I never said give teachers guns," like it was stated on fake news at CNN and at NBC. There is no political news story here that doesn't finish up in a row between the president and the mainstream liberal media. What I said, Trump said today, was to look at the possibility of giving concealed guns to gun-adept teachers with military or special training experience. Only the best, say 20% of teachers, would be able to fire back immediately if a savage sicko came into a school with bad intentions. So, you know, I don't think we should dwell on whether Trump meant all teachers yesterday and he means 20% today. The fact is, he is saying 20% of teachers, say, should have special military training and carry concealed guns in schools. He also, today, interestingly, repeated calls to end bump stock sales. Remember, bump stocks were the device that were used to turn effectively rifles into machine guns that were used in the Las Vegas shooting. And also, and perhaps quite significantly, you know, the president now is saying, actually, he said he will be strongly pushing for comprehensive background checks with an emphasis on mental health. And I do think there's been a change, actually, a political change in this country since what happened on Valentine's Day. I do now think that genuine background checks before people buy guns are going to become part of life here in America. But I want to ask you, has the president come up with a solution to the problem of gun violence in schools? And if you think no, a lot more still needs to be done, call me on 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think at least he's doing something, the others didn't really, in which case text to 84850. And I'm particularly keen to hear from you. You can call, you can text, you can tweet, but I'm particularly keen to hear from people, you know, who live here within the USA, and you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook. I'm live here in DC. You can, of course, comment there too. And my first caller is from Cognac in France, and his name is Nigel. Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening, Nigel. We've spoken previously on the...
I remember. Well, there aren't many of us about, so I tend to remember if Nigels ring in, you know. What do you think? I mean, do you see a change in the political weather coming in America in the wake of the Florida shootings?
Yeah, I mean, if they were to adapt a European or UK-style licensing for people that want to start to own guns, especially younger people, say under 21, I think that would be a massive start, because it would then deny, well, that would be a political problem, it would deny the bad people, in inverted commas, access to holding a weapon. And obviously out there now, there's a number of people that shouldn't be holding weapons because they wouldn't pass the European license arrangements. They wouldn't be fit.
Well, in theory, Nigel, in theory...
That would be good.
Yeah, in theory, what you say is right. But, I mean, don't forget, we've got the strictest gun laws of virtually any country in the Western world. A lot of it came in post-Dunblane. And yet, gun crime hasn't gone down in Britain as a result of us being stricter, has it?
No, not. But at least, you know, it does weed out certain people, without a doubt. But if you want to move on to this idea of arming teachers, which is really why I rang.
Yeah.
On a practical... Forget the politics. On a sheer practical basis, you would have to arm every single teacher, because if a perpetrator had a pistol, for example, not an AR-15, because I've tested this out, you can fire off 30 rounds in about 15 seconds. We've tried it here in France as a test. How quick can you fire? So unless you've got a teacher in that room, it's no good having 20%, because the armed teacher might be 40 seconds away and the damage has already been done. So if you're really trying to stop it on a sheer shooting basis, every teacher would have to hold a weapon, and they would have to be trained at some staggeringly high level.
Which is not practically possible, is it?
4 times a week. No, you couldn't do it.
No, and also, Nigel, my guess is a large number of teachers would say, look, we refuse to do this. You know, it's just against our conscience to carry guns or use guns. But wouldn't Nigel, even 20% of teachers in a school being armed make some of these massacres not just less likely to happen, but they could be dealt with more quickly?
Well, they might be a deterrent. I don't know. But again, practically speaking, if the shooting occurs in Class A and the armed teacher's in Class D, and it takes him 40 seconds to hear about it, and he gets into classroom A, it's over then. That's already happened. So you haven't done anything about it in real terms. So again, unless the teacher in that class was armed, I don't think it would be any use, except if it was seen as a deterrent.
Okay, Nigel, I thank you. And I wonder about deterrence. I'm not sure that the deterrent argument works with any of this. Why? Because the people that go into these schools with guns and commit these acts know they're not coming out the other side of this alive anyway. I mean, they're virtually out there on a suicide mission. They are people nearly always with mental health problems. Quite often we see with all sorts of forms of terrorism a link to quite heavy repeated drug use. And I don't buy the argument at all that even if you armed every teacher that it would act as a deterrent. What I'm thinking is, would they, given how many guns are in circulation in America, would they be able to deal with the problem more quickly? Or maybe the other approach is that you effectively turn every school into somewhere that's got the same level of security as, let's say, Heathrow Airport. That you have detectors, that you have bag checks, and that you make sure that guns or knives simply can't get into a school. I don't know which of these are going to be opted for here in America, but I do definitely get the feeling that President Trump yesterday was listening, and he does know he needs to do something about this. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C. It's now 7:15. Well, gun controls are now being talked about here in the USA, and in the last 24 hours, the president has said that he wants to end bump stock sales. These are the devices that turn rifles effectively into machine guns. He's made it clear that he will be strongly backing, comprehensive background checks with an emphasis on mental health. And the president is suggesting that up to 20% of teachers in schools should get specific military training and should carry concealed guns, so that when someone, a savage sicko, as he describes them, goes into a school with ill intent, they can be dealt with very quickly. And I'm asking you, has the president now come up with a solution to these problems? And I'm going to go to Edward in Salt Lake City and ask him that question. It's good afternoon there, isn't it, Edward?
Yes, sir. Well, just a little bit past noon, actually, about 20 minutes past.
Okay, Edward, is the president right? I mean, he's clearly changed tack on this, and he's listened. You know, he met with children who'd been there and seen that massacre, parents of the bereaved. Is the president right to try and change this debate?
Absolutely, yes, he is. But let me tell you something, Nigel. First of all, let me tell you, I'm a huge fan of yours. I try to watch your show every chance I get on Facebook.
Thank you.
I am a former police officer.
Yep.
I am also a former felon.
That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting double, Edward. Were you a police officer before you were a felon, or the other way round?
Well, it had to be before, because I'm certainly not allowed to now.
Quite.
Okay. Now, so my point is, I have seen the argument from both sides of the aisle. Okay.
Yep.
As a police officer in San Francisco, almost 30 years ago, I saw it from the side of the police. And the last thing I ever wanted to do was walk into a situation with somebody who was armed, especially armed better than I am. Mm-hmm. As a felon, while I was sitting in federal prison, I talked to a lot of people who felt the same way. The last thing anybody who's intent on committing a crime wants to do is walk into a situation where somebody is better armed than they are.
Okay.
It's just that's the way it is. Have you ever heard of the Sturgis bike rally in Sturgis, South Dakota?
Explain.
Okay. The Sturgis bike rally has been going on for a lot of years. I'm not going to go into details about it, but it's rather interesting that under no circumstances has anybody ever attacked this bike rally. There are as many as 200,000 people there during a 2-week period in August in South Dakota. But never once has there ever been an attempt at a mass shooting. Yes, there have been shootings, but that's by the participants. The reason nobody does this is because somebody who goes in there with the intent of killing knows they're not going to come back out.
Yeah. Well, Edward, I understand that, but let's just think about this. What is in the mind of somebody, in this case a 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, who'd been expelled from that school? What is in the mind of someone like that goes into a school with the intent to kill and maim as many people as possible? Doesn't that shooter know that he's not coming out alive anyway?
No.
No?
No. That's not necessarily what he wants. Okay,
Right.
Dylan Roof in Charleston didn't want to get killed. He wanted the same. His statement was he wanted to start a race war. He knew that he was going to come out alive. He intended to come out alive. Obviously, Nicholas Cruz knew he would come out alive. See, the thing is, if somebody's going to go in and shoot up a school, shoot up a church like in Sutherland, Texas, they're going for a gun-free zone because they have a greater chance of getting away. They want the fame. They want the notoriety. That is what they are usually after.
All right. So, Edward, before the break, I said I don't buy the argument that arming 20% of teachers would act as a deterrent, but you're telling me you think I'm wrong, yeah?
Nigel, this is one case where I got to tell you, mate, you're dead wrong.
Okay, fine. Well, you put that very clearly. Edward in Salt Lake City, thank you for your call. And Edward, a police officer and a felon, and a fascinating phone call. And he thinks, actually, there is a deterrent. He thinks a lot of these guys just want fame, but they actually want to get away. I'm not so sure, but hey, I'm happy to listen to what people have to say. Hi, Nigel, I'm Solomon. It's amazing that it's mainly Obama's supporters who criticise Trump's actions when Obama, in his first 2 years, had a majority in Congress and did 10 times nothing. Solomon, you're right. Obama didn't do anything. He talked about it, but he would argue, I think, Obama, that after the midterms, he was in no position to do so. But he certainly, you're quite right in saying, did nothing in that first couple of years. The US Constitution was written in the 18th century for single-shot flintlocks, not for 21st century machine guns. The US should have some more common sense and simply amend the Constitution, says Richard. Richard, I think some changes are coming, but I have said this before on this show, even if draconian gun laws were to come in America, and that isn't going to happen, but even if they did, what would you do about the sheer number of guns in circulation already? Nigel, it's completely beyond me how someone could think that putting more guns in schools would reduce the amount of school shootings. The whole point is the American philosophy of, if I own a gun, then I'm safe from anybody else with a gun, is completely flawed, says Craig in West Sussex. Well, Craig, to some extent, you do get to a very big cultural difference in terms of attitudes of owning guns and carrying guns between the UK and the USA. And, we speak the same language, we have common law, we have an awful lot in common, but on issues like this, we do have different cultural attitudes. David is calling from Harpenden and a new caller to this show. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Nigel. Great supporter of yourself and a massive supporter of Donald Trump.
Right. Well, it's very interesting, David, because I noticed about a year ago, I think I was the only person in Britain that supported President Trump, but I'm hearing a lot more people saying it now.
Let me tell you something. Mr. Trump will be the best president America's ever had, in my belief. He's just amazing.
Well, I tell you what, David. I did watch it. I did watch that speech in Davos, and you'll be interested to know, David, piece of polling out today in America saying Americans are feeling better about their standing in the world now compared to where they were a year ago, and it's gone up by 13%, so big rise. So, David,
I tell America every year, and it's, to me, a fabulous, unbelievable place.
So, David, tell me, is the president right on this? Is he right that arming 20% of teachers would make it safer?
I would vote yes with him. It's a very difficult subject. Who knows the correct answers? What I will say is that the nutters and the terrorists, if you take all the guns out of circulation, whatever, the nutters and the terrorists, including in the UK, have guns.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you say or wherever, if someone is going to shoot something, they're going to get the guns, they're going to get the knives. You cannot stop it. The problem is, taking guns off everyone else is easy in a way because we're all law-abiding citizens. We do as we're told, and we're just there to be shot.
Yeah. So, I mean, the argument, David, the argument always goes that if you take guns off the good guys, the bad guys still carry them anyway, and that is very much an argument. That is very much an argument that that you would hear in this country. So you think he's on the right track, yeah?
Listen, it'll come out in the wash, but the bloke, honestly, Donald Trump is a legend.
Excellent.
You're fabulous. He's a legend.
David, thank you for your call. David, a first-time caller there. Clearly the biggest Trump supporter in the entire United Kingdom. I get by text, the American obsession with guns stems from their obsession with the recreational killing of wildlife, and it inevitably leads on occasion to the killing of people. Of course, you won't read this out because you have a gun licence yourself, says Mark in Oxford. Oh, Mark. Oh, Mark. There we are. I read it out, didn't I? Derek is calling from southwest France, where they have a lot of guns, I think, Derek, don't they?
Well, yes, you're right. Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening.
I'm a UK and also a very proud member of the National Rifle Association of America.
Okay. So when you heard the speech today, Derek, today from the NRA, I mean, they were backing Trump's call, but is it time that the NRA, and you're a member, is it time the NRA started to think about more comprehensive background checks before people can buy guns?
From obtaining a gun. But as far as licensing is concerned, it is something that Americans will not, and quite rightly will not accept, because once an item is licensed, it belongs to the state, and at any time the state can call that in and confiscate it. Happened in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, Derek, I think you're right. I think that the idea of a full gun licensing coming in America is, frankly, at this moment in time, a complete and utter non-starter. But Derek, one could be a little bit critical here of Trump and the NRA by saying, shouldn't they have reached this conclusion before the mass attack in Florida?
Well, you could possibly criticise the criticism of that against the NRA, but the fact is it is totally hypocritical of all these people who are calling for more gun laws when the most obvious thing to do is to do what politicians and celebrities enjoy every day of the year, a full armed protection. There is no reason why school children shouldn't, in the United States, where guns are available to people, where school children shouldn't enjoy that same protection.
Well, that's what it may come to. I don't know, Derek, where this debate's going. What I do know, and thank you for the call, what I do know, listening to Kellyanne Conway, one of the president's advisors, speaking this morning outside the White House, Kellyanne Conway said, we'll take some time to kick this around, but there is going to be action. And the one thing for certain with the Trump regime is when they say there's going to be action, there is action. Whether everyone likes it or not is, of course, an entirely separate issue. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. I'm live from Washington, D.C. It's now 7:30. President Trump backs some new gun controls. He wants some background checks, particularly on people who've got mental health problems. He wants bump stock sales, those converters that put rifles into machine guns, to end. But he says, in response to the school shooting, he wonders whether the answer is to arm about 20% of teachers and get them trained militarily so that they can actually fire back against people, or savage sickos, as he calls them, that come into schools and cause harm. But at home today, Emily Thornberry has been speaking to LBC, and she has said that Labour would seek to join a new customs union, which is pretty much like the current customs union post-Brexit. I'm trying to read this out without losing my temper. The Shadow Foreign Secretary said Labour's plan would mean Britain negotiates jointly with the EU to secure third-party trade deals in the future. Let's listen to what she told Ian Dale.
So, of course, we will need to be in a form of customs union.
What kind of form of customs union?
So we will. So technically, because we're leaving the European Union, we can't be in the customs union that we're in now. So we leave, and then we have to negotiate a new agreement. That, we think, is likely to be a customs union that will look pretty much like the current customs union.
So that would preclude a British government outside the EU from negotiating its own trade agreements? That's
if we were,
crucial,
if we were to say if we were during these negotiations to say to the European Union, if you want to negotiate with third parties, with third countries, we could be connected to that agreement, and it will be to the advantage of Europe that you have a great big economy like Britain as part of your negotiations. But we will need to be part of forming those relationships and forming those rules in order for you to take advantage of the fact that you're negotiating on behalf of Europe and you're negotiating with us too.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. there we have the shadow Foreign Secretary, clearly oblivious to the fact that in the last 48 hours, Singapore have said how keen they'd be to have a trade deal with the United Kingdom. The Australians have been in town this week saying how keen they'd be to have a trade deal with the United Kingdom. And here I am at CPAC, where there are thousands of people who would love to have a closer relationship, including a trade deal between us and the United Kingdom. All I would say is it's pretty clear now that if you want Brexit betrayed, vote Labour, because there'll be no difference in our global relationships if Labour win the next election, other than the fact we will perhaps have left the Treaty of Rome. And this frankly is deeply cynical from Labour. Over 4 million people voted Labour in the general election last June, who voted Brexit the year before, and they are being very, very badly let down. Frankly, they've been deceived. But you can, of course, ring up on 0345 6060 973 and tell me I'm wrong. Tell me actually there is a consistency between what she said today and the manifesto that Labour stood on in that last general election. And if you want to listen to her full response, go to lbc.co.uk. I won't be. That clip was more than enough for me. But back to the President's call. Is he right to say that if 20% of primary school teachers were trained and armed with concealed guns, they could stop these atrocities when savage sickos come into schools in America? I'm going to ask Joe in Liverpool that question. Good evening, Joe.
You're right, Nigel.
I'm all right. What do you think?
Well, basically, so I've heard he's planning on banning the assault rifles and the bump stocks, Donald Trump.
Yep.
I assume that he'll be unarming the guards at the White House then. Is that the case, or will that not be the case?
Well, listen, I'm quite sure, Joe, that when it comes to protecting the president, the vice president, and people like that, they will use whatever means necessary.
Yeah,
but I don't
they're
think
more important than anyone else. They're no more important than the average American citizen. So why should they be armed with the assault rifles and not the average American citizen?
Well, if you work out the percentage chance of the average American citizen or school kid being shot at, and then work out the percentage chance of an American president being shot at, I think you find, Joe, that there is rationale for defending the US president. But let's frankly, I don't think, Joe, it's helpful for us to debate the president's personal security. But what I do want to discuss,
I agree.
What I do want to discuss is he right to think that arming 20% of teachers is right, or would it be better to try and put metal detectors in to try and close down weapons completely from entering schools?
The metal detectors is a much better option. I think with America's gun culture now, it's not the fact that it's the guns that are the problem, it's the American society as a whole. Because you get other countries that are heavily armed with strict gun control. You've got the South American countries such as Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela. They all have strict gun control, but they all have gun massacres much, much on a greater scale than America. So it's not the guns, I think it's the American society. So I think what Trump needs to do, focus more on, is maybe better education towards guns. If he's going to have because you've got heavily armed nations such as Switzerland and Finland, and is it Serbia? I'm not too sure. They're all just almost heavily armed as America, and the gun violence is pretty much lower than ours.
So basically, Joe, there needs to be a cultural change in America, which is going to take time, isn't it?
100%, yeah. It's not the guns, it's American culture. But I would say that arming teachers is not the best idea. No.
Fine. Joe, you made your point. Thank you. And I get here on text, teachers are there to educate people. If they want security, they should hire a proper team. Or better still, the big orange primitive buffoon could work towards less guns instead of being controlled by the NRA. I thought you had problems with rich people buying influence. George Soros, anyone, says Matt in Sidcup. Well, Matt, you can be abusive about the president if you want to be. That's fine. I'm not sure it necessarily helps you win this debate on LBC or anywhere else. He has certainly, and for those that are deeply critical of America's gun culture, he has made a couple of quite big changes, particularly in backing up, some really quite strict background checks on people getting guns. And that is a big change. Phil is calling from New York. Good evening, Phil.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Nigel.
Good evening. Now, New York, of course, somewhere where the president is not very popular. What do you make of his comments?
I think his comments about giving teachers guns is an absolutely ridiculous comment. And I've heard a couple of people on this show and many other shows say teachers are there to teach. They're not there to be security guards or to work in that sort of area. And you know what? even if you did give these guys guns, a concealed handgun is not going to be any kind of deterrent to a machine gun, and I've heard a couple of people say that have come on as well. And on top of that, even the police. That's number one. Number two, the fact that Donald Trump has taken £31,190,000 from the NRA is a hypocrite. That a huge majority, well, I say a huge majority, a lot of the GOP are taking in excess of millions of dollars from the NRA. The only reason that there's been no change before, I heard you say, at least he's doing something, but there's no change before. Well, nobody wanted to change before because, let's face it, the whole GOP, which run the Senate and the House when Obama was in, would do nothing about it. And why would they? Because they're getting paid handsomely from the NRA. Gun culture has got to change. What they should do is they should license them the same as cars, have checks on them periodically the same as they do with cars. They should have insurance, do all that kind of. I'm for the Second Amendment. I don't mind the Second Amendment being there, but I'm against having machine guns and semi and automatic weapons because it makes no sense. Normal people can't go.
And there's no argument, Phil. Phil, there's no argument for it, whether it's for sporting shooting of targets, even if it's for shooting wildlife. There's no argument, is there, for having semi-automatic weapons and all the rest of it. I totally understand your point on that. Do you think, Phil, that when Trump said this morning, he'd be strongly pushing comprehensive background checks with an emphasis on mental health, that we are beginning to see a slight shift in the debate here?
Now, I'll go along with you that I kind of agree with that, but unfortunately what you're doing is the same as what the NRA is doing over here. You're trying to deflect it onto mental health. In Switzerland they have mental health, and Switzerland is one of those countries that has more guns per capita for the country, the same as America, all right? And they don't have the same problem, all right? And so don't try and pin this on mental health. I mean, yes, there's something wrong with people that go in and shoot up schools,
so Phil, basically it's a deeper...
Just because of mental health.
It's a deeper cultural problem, yeah?
Yeah, don't you? Yeah, and I really, what annoys me is all the conservatives want to deflect this and say it's not about guns. It is about guns and the amount of guns that are there. And you know what? The fact that the guns are there, even though that there's more guns owned in the US than there is people, that's not a relevant factor, all right? If you put in the right controls to gun controls to allow people to have the Second Amendment and the freedom to own guns, tell me, what is the reason? Why would you not? You cannot drive a car, all right, in this country or any other country without having it taxed, insured, all right, and checked on a regular basis to make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
So I have no understanding why that would not be acceptable for gun owners.
Oh, well, Phil, I don't think America's ready for that yet, but I do think we're heading in a direction. I do think there was a change in debate. I thank Phil in New York for his call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC and live from Washington, D.C. It's 7:45. President Trump met surviving school children from Florida and bereaved parents yesterday and said that he was listening. And whilst he's now begun to start to back checks, particularly for mental health, for people who want to go out and buy guns, he has suggested maybe the best way of dealing with mass shootings at schools is for 20% or so of the teachers to be trained militarily to carry concealed weapons so that bad guys can get taken out more quickly than waiting for the services, who took 10 minutes, not that that's long, but 10 minutes to turn up in Florida the other day. Peter on Facebook says, if guns prevent crime, then why doesn't the USA have the lowest crime rate in the world? Guns don't protect you. Statistics show you are more likely to get shot if you have a gun in the house, and the person who gets shot is more likely to be the householder than the intruder. Gary says, an armed security gate is the best solution in American schools, in my humble opinion. And Ben comments on what we heard from Emily Thornberry. and says a customs union is a group of countries with no tariffs and tariff border. They decide tariffs. Yes, Ben, but the point about a customs union is it puts tariffs on goods that come in from the rest of the world, and it prevents members of it from negotiating their own trade deals. And it does seem to me we've basically got the whole world queuing up to wanting to do deals with us, and yet the Labour Party don't appear to be interested in that, and I think they are letting down their voters, a big chunk of their voters, in a very, very significant way. David says more guns in the USA than people. No way they will ever stop these shootings. The boat has long gone. On Thornbury, Dave says, why gamble on other deals when we've got one on the table? Well, Dave, yeah, we have got one on the table, but we voted against staying part of that customs union. But hey, I tell you what, that is a debate for another night. Gavin is a first-time caller to this show. He's calling from Bourne End. Good evening, Gavin.
Evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. So, are America now beginning to head in the right direction, or is the idea of arming some teachers just crazy?
It's beyond crazy. Thank God I live in England. That's all I can say. Look, when you're a teacher, and I've got a lot of friends who are teachers, they're very... the whole part about they're nurturing, they're loving, they're caring, they're not aggressive, they wouldn't be interested in hurting anyone else. It's just too far down the line. It's like, you've probably heard a saying, killing to make peace. It's a contradiction. The problem that Americans have is that they don't realise the problem they have. The problem is the young men that kill other students, there lies the problem. It's not... The access to guns is absolutely a problem. We have mental health in this country. You know, if you look at 40% of young offenders in institutions, they will have some form of mental health or something like dyslexia because they're not understood. They don't go out and get hold of illegal weapons and then kill indiscriminately. It's a cultural thing that it's not going to be solved by putting a Band-Aid over a bleeding arm.
Well, Gavin, clearly, you know, and you're the third caller tonight that's made this point about a cultural problem, and clearly changing that is not something that anyone could do overnight. That would take many, many years, different education process, different thought process. But Gavin, I completely agree with your point, and I did make it earlier, that a significant number of teachers would say we would never want to carry guns, we certainly would never contemplate using guns, and I do understand that completely. The point being, teachers wouldn't be forced to have guns, but the suggestion was 20% or so, you know, who would want to do this would be trained. Would that provide more protection for school kids or not?
Yeah, I kind of... Well, do you know what? I don't think it does, because I think it's moving guns into the schools. So, you know, a lot of younger kids are quite big, they're quite strong, particularly if they've got psychotic tendencies. It wouldn't be very difficult to work out which of our teachers carry guns. Concealed, well, how on earth they're not going to be that concealed, they're not going to be visible, fair enough, I get that. But if I'm out of my mind and I know there's a guy with a gun and he's a relatively guy I think I can take out, why wouldn't I bother? I'm in the school now, I've now got a gun. Okay, it might only be a pistol, I can take out 6, 8 kids. You know, it's actually even worse. I think it's moving the problem beyond the perimeter into the schools, and there'll be targets. You know,
well, Gavin, no, that's a very thoughtful point. You know, maybe the answer is that schools have big security gates and schools actually have to have armed guards on them. That, of course, would put the costs up, but maybe that's the better solution. I don't know. Gavin, I thank you very much for your call. I get by text, the whole thing seems knee-jerk and hysterical. There are many more factors than guns, i.e. the total failure of the FBI to react to numerous warning signals. Well, I tell you what, Lisa, very interesting, but so much debate here on what happened in Florida last week, and I was in Fox News' studios here in DC this morning. I appeared on their breakfast program, and I'm really surprised that the American media are not attaching much blame to the FBI for Florida at all, despite the fact, and let's just get this right, Nicholas Cruz himself said on social media, I'm going to become a school shooter. He was reported to the FBI, who to some extent investigated that complaint, and yet nothing was done. And I do really wonder, are they spending too much time looking for Russians that might have colluded at some point in the past with Team Trump and not getting on with the job? I'm surprised how little criticism there is of the FBI in America today. I'm absolutely certain that if Scotland Yard had been given a tip-off about somebody and they hadn't acted on it, it would dominate the front pages of our newspapers for day after day after day. Joseph is calling me from Colchester. Joseph, is Trump heading in the right direction with this, or is he absolutely wrong?
Well, I'm always right.
Okay, go on.
Well, I think there should be a referendum in America over this. There should be the gun laws, because I love Donald Trump, I do. I think he could be the best president since Lincoln if he settles down a little bit.
Yeah.
But let the American people decide what laws with guns they should have or not have.
Well, when it comes, Joseph, to referendums, of course, in many states here, calling local referendums by getting a significant, enough people to sign an authorised ballot is a relatively easy thing to do. California, particularly, they have referendums on virtually everything, from the legal or decriminalisation of drug use to what age you can drink alcohol and all the rest of it. So the states in America do have significant power over many of these areas. So the idea of referendums held across the states on a degree of controls is not one I think that is impossible. But what's your opinion, Joseph? Do you think it's better to train and arm 20% of teachers, or is it better to make effectively schools like Heathrow Airport, where it's very tough to get in?
Well, all I can say, listen, all I'm saying is that before Donald Trump come along, since he's been a president, I loved him. I thought, you know what, he's going to change things.
Yep.
But when all these shooters go along, he's not doing anything. It's his opportunity to do something no one's ever done before in the history of America.
Yep.
And all that is, look at all them children being killed. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Tell me I'm wrong.
Look, Joseph, I think there is a problem here. I think there is a cultural problem here in America with guns. I think there does need to be change. But remember, they do cherish their constitutional rights here. They do cherish their freedoms. They do believe in it. And I think, I do think that Trump is changing course a bit on this. But Trump is radical in many ways. There are lots of things he's done since becoming president that genuinely will be categorised as radical. I don't think on this he will be. Joseph, I thank you. I've quickly got time for my last caller tonight, which is Philip, who's calling from Windsor. Good evening, Philip.
Hello, Nigel. I don't want to sound clear-ball clinical about it, but you want your shooters with a fully automatic weapon because they will run out of ammunition sooner and they will miss with most of their shots. So what we're talking about here is not bump stocks. In fact, you want your shooter with a bump stock.
All right, that's a very different point. It's a very different point of view, but I get the point. You pull the trigger and within a second and a half the whole lot's gone, yeah?
Correct.
Unless you've got more ammunition and you can reload.
Well, the average infantryman carries 200 rounds, and if he fires on full automatic, he can get through that in 5 minutes.
Right, okay. That point aside, Philip, would it be sensible, given the extent to which guns are quite, freely carried in many states in America, would it be sensible for a percentage of teachers to be armed so they can respond quickly?
Well, it's one of a range of options you could use, but I come back to the ammunition. It's the ammunition that kills, and that's what should be controlled, not the rifle necessarily.
Okay. No, Philip, listen, thank you. Lots of great opinions, strong opinions on this issue tonight. I certainly feel some change is coming. We've seen Las Vegas, we've seen all sorts of atrocities, and nothing much changing. I just get the feeling something is slightly different in the air here on this issue. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C. I'm back on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much indeed.